AI seminar. Yao-Yi is an associate professor in research in spatial sciences, a faculty member in data science, the director of the Spatial Computing Laboratory, the associate director of the NSF Integrated Media Systems Center at USC. And Yao-Yi is actually leaving us in the fall of 2021. He will be joining the computer science and engineering department at the University of Minnesota as an associate professor. And today, Yao-Yi is going to talk to us about spatial AI and its application. So just a reminder, if you're an attendee, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions during the talk. If you're a panelist, please use the chat, or at the end, we will have a live Q&A session. You can just raise your hand. Yao-Yi?
All right. Thank you, Deborah. I'm very happy to be here. I think this is my second AI seminar. I did my PhD at ISI, so this is very, very cool for me to do an AI seminar. I still remember the time when I was a student listening to all this AI seminar. All right, so today I'm going to present spatial AI and some applications focusing on air quality prediction and machine reading maps. I am an associate professor research at the USC Spatial Sciences Institute. If you don't know about Spatial Sciences Institute, take a look at our website. We offer a spatial data science degree, very interdisciplinary, working with all kinds of departments on campus and also outside USC. I'll be leaving USC after 16 years, joining the University of Minnesota in this fall. All right, let's start. So what are spatial AI methods? When we think about machine learning and data mining methods, they generally assume independent and identical distributed random variables, IID. But spatial data are not really IID. For example, we can have spatial autocorrelation. That means nearby things are similar. If you look at this map from Zillow, you can see that nearby houses would have a similar prices. And this also happened for other variables as well. Also, we have spatial non-stationarity. For example, say we want to be able to predict air quality in this area. And we want to use highway as one of the feature or predictors to predict air quality. And you can see, well, in a suburban area, we would have a good air quality, although it's near highway. But in downtown area, we might not have good air quality, although it's still near highway. So this is the spatial non-stationarity problem that makes models difficult to generalize to everywhere in space. And there are also other types of spatial properties that we need to take into account to be able to solve real world problems. This is Bob. Bob is my dog, and she's going to help us summarize the presentation today. All right, so why do we care? Location in spatial data, location is the key to help us link various types of data. And by linking them, we can provide context-rich annotated training data. We can provide ideas of a location so that we can train a machine learning model or design a machine learning model to better handle a scenario. So here I give you one example. In this example, this is from Facebook Map with AI. In this example, they're using OpenStreetMaps. So if you don't know about OpenStreetMaps, this is crowdsourced map. It's a crowdsourced version of Google Maps. You can look at it that way. And you can download the data set. And in this case, they download the OpenStreetMap data set. The goal is to extract road pixels from satellite imagery. So they overlay the OpenStreetMap roads, these white pixels here, on top of satellite imagery, and use all these road pixels to annotate the satellite imagery to provide road labels. And by doing so, they were able to create more than 100 million labels and use that to train a computer vision model to recognize roads. But there is a but. but using OSM data in their case presents several challenges that require novel approaches to overcome. Here I'm going to show you some examples of the challenges. For example, when we take data sets from different sources, especially here in the case of spatial data, we might have positional offsets. That means if you just use location to overlay them, the buildings in this case will not be aligned. Also, the content might not be consistent. On the OpenStreetMap, you have one building, but in the satellite imagery, you can have multiple buildings. This could be that these two data sets were created at different time and things has changed. Also, for spatial data, we have data scale, spatial scale, and representation conflict. In this example, you see USGS topographic maps, and we have a really nice railroad symbol here. And if you just overlay USGS railroad data, so the red line, this is vector data, contemporary railroads. If you just overlay them, these two symbols, they do not agree, right? So this could be data scale and representation issues because two data sets were created from different scales. So the USGS contemporary railroads could be from a more coarse satellite imagery. So based on all these challenges, and the nice thing about spatial data in our lab, we are taking real world problems and data sets. We build end-to-end data analytics systems, including Deep Latte for air quality prediction, forecasting, handling time series data or location time series data, Strabo for handling georeferenced or non-georeferenced historical map scans, also work with IMSC to manage this. This is the largest traffic database in Southern California, collecting sensor data from traffic sensor data, bus trajectories, and all kinds of traffic related information from LA Metro. So with all these systems and data sets, we were able to develop fundamental research, and we built working systems, tools, and help other people to use our systems and tools. And in turn, they sponsor our research. So these are all the companies and organizations who are using our open source tools right now. All right, so the first application I want to talk about is air quality prediction. This is based on, I'm going to show two applications today. So this work is based on our ICDM work by a PhD student, Yijin Lin, last year. So for air quality prediction, let's look at air quality sensors. If you look at this map, this is Los Angeles, 40 kilometer by 50 kilometers. And you can see all these dots are air quality sensors. The stars are the EPA sensors. These are the huge fixed site sensors. And the smaller, these dots are budget sensors, crowdsourced sensors. But you can see these sensors are limited and they are unevenly distributed. So a huge area here do not have any sensor. So if we just take all these sensors to do air quality prediction, this is what you would get. And this is very common. If you just Google air quality in Los Angeles, you will be able to see a map like this. This is typically done by spatial statistics, spatial interpolation methods, and they produce very smooth results over the space. So Los Angeles is here. Well, what this tells us is the air quality in the entire city is the same everywhere, right? This cannot be true, but do we really want to have fine scale variations of air quality prediction? So if you look at Los Angeles, and if you look at spatial statistics results for interpolation of air quality, these are not suitable for tracking people's exposure. For example, if I just walk around, I track my PM 2.5 readings. PM 2.5 are a specific type of air pollutant. These are small particles that can get into your body and will never leave. So these are bad stuff. Or if you drive a car from Long Beach to ISI, this is your air quality. So spatial interpolation methods, they do not reflect local PM2.5 variations. They are not suitable for exposure tracking. What we really need or what we want is something like this. So something like on the right side, we have very fine spatial variations. So we can track people's movement and look at their exposure to PM2.5 readings, walking, and also in the car. So these fine scale predictions help us to track accurate PM2.5 exposures, and we will be able to do many downstream tasks analyzing people's exposure. So our hypothesis is based on all these previous studies on air quality prediction. So prediction is different from forecasting. Forecasting is looking into the future. Prediction is for the location that you do not have a sensor. How do you know the air quality of that location? So based on all these previous studies, we know that environmental characteristics has a significant impact on air quality. For example, all these studies, they have very different study areas, Canada, US. There are also others. I just cut the table. And they use different various sizes of monitor counts. So some of them has really large number, others only have small numbers of air quality monitors. And they want to predict different types of air pollutant. Okay, so this is their dependent variable, and their independent variables can vary from one location to another. And this is largely because some areas, they do not have a specific data set. And the way they decide on which independent variable that describe the environment that they want to use is based on installing many sensors within a short period of time and use statistic method to look at all these correlations. So for example, some of them look at road traffic. Others also look at census data. Population is important. Wind speed, wind directions, also distance to a river, sometimes distance to bus stations, etc. What's very interesting here is they also have a buffer size. What this means is they want to, in their model, they said that, okay, road traffic is important for air quality only within 300 meters. And you can see this buffer size is location specific. Every location will have different buffer size, and these are determined by the experts. So with all this background work, we think we are able to take all this data and automatically come up with all these independent variables and buffer size and make the prediction. So what are the technical challenges? Well, first, we need to be able to learn from thousands of features describing the environmental characteristics with only sparse and unevenly distributed observations, sensor locations. And we want to be able to jointly model the space and time effect of air quality. For example, at 9 a.m., let's say there is a factory producing pollutant, and this is the wind direction. At 10 a.m., the pollutant travels to this area because of the wind directions, but these two areas, because they are nearby locations to the factory, so they do have poor air quality. So this is what we call spatial temporal effects. And existing approaches, either spatial statistics or machine learning, they generally require expert knowledge on what features are important. They do not deal with space and time together. And most importantly, they cannot really handle sparse and unevenly distributed observations, which in practice, it's common in every study area. So in our lab, we built Deep Latte. So this Deep Latte framework can learn from thousands of features describing the environmental characteristics, can learn how to jointly model spatial temporal effect. So the input is a bunch of features describing the environment, for example, road length or temperature. So some of them stay the same over time, others will change over time. And the first step is to create an initial embedding representation space to describe the environment. Then the second step, the most interesting part, is to use spatial data property to improve the embeddings. And this can help us to learn from sparse and unevenly distributed observations. So the Entirety Blatte framework has 4 components. I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'm going to focus on the last 2 parts. All right, so formally, the input is multidimensional matrix. First, X. X is a grid map width and height covering the study area, so grid map. And each cell in X contains dynamic features and static features describing the environment. So static features like green land and primary roads. And you can see each cell here is the strength of, for example, the length of the primary road for that location. And we take OpenStreetMap, and each cell looks like this. We just summarize all these features within a cell. And we also have sparse observations of air qualities from air quality stations. Again, this is a grid map, the same width and height, and each cell has an observation. And we do have many empty cells because limited observations. So we take this X and Y, and at the current time, X and Y, and we do include previous times X, previous times Y's to create an initial embedding Z. And this Z is the embedding describing the environment. Then we exploit the spatial data property to refine Z and make the prediction. And this is the expected result for air quality prediction. Every cell will now have a prediction value of air quality. So just a recap, this is what I'm going to talk about next, the 4 components: feature selection, learning spatial temporal effect, and improving the embeddings. All right, so feature selection and compacting. So first, we want to, because we have thousands of features describing the environment, we want to eliminate irrelevant features. We add standard sparse layer. So in the sparse layer, it's very simple. These are all the input features, and the sparse layer has the single connections between layers, and we just add an L1 regularization to minimize the summation of the weight. So for example, X1 node can describe the length of the primary road, X2 can describe the area size of industrial land, X3 describes the temperature, and if eventually W3 is small, then temperature is not important. So cool, now we can remove the irrelevant features, but we also want to capture this behavior. So if you look at here, so there is a interaction between the feature type, time, and space. For example, primary road on Mondays, you have lots of traffic, so air quality might not be good, but primary road on Sundays, you don't have traffic, so the air quality might be good. And to compile these feature interactions, we use also a standard autoencoder. So it works like this. The selected feature go into an encoder, generate an embedding, compact embedding, capture the interaction, going back to the decoder. So for example, if you look at here, this embedding, a component of the embedding would be able to capture the interaction between, in this example, 3 features from the sparse layer. All right, so autoencoder, very simple. We just minimize the difference between the input and the input to the encoder and output from the decoder to make sure that the condensed feature embedding can capture useful information. All right, so now we have this, a condensed embedding that describe the environment. Now we want to learn the spatial temporal effect. So the spatial temporal effect, we mean the current air quality of a location is correlated to the environmental characteristics now, in the past, and also from neighboring locations. And here we use a convolutional LSTM layer, and this layer adds the convolutional operation directly in the recurrent neural network. So the CNN works spatially, and the recurrent neural networks works temporally. So it looks like this. So to start, every time we have this compacted representation of environmental characteristics at each time. So each time we have this. And within each LSTM cell, we have the convolutional operation. And this will look at surrounding neighbors and their embeddings to decide how do you combine them in order to generate all this hidden information, move on to the last step so that we have a final embedding that we can use for prediction. Cool. All right, now we can do the prediction. So are we done yet? I show you this feature selection part that we can compact features, capture important feature interactions. We can capture the spatial temporal effect using CNN and LSTM. But we still have sparse and unevenly distributed observations. This means there are only limited variations of environmental characteristics in the training data. This is bad because now the model will focus on the labeled location, right? We ignore all other locations, although you might have variations in the environmental characteristics. And the learned prediction, if we just used all this previous component, they will focus on a few locations, and the result can fluctuate within a small distance, something like this. So this prediction looks artificial. It doesn't really look right. And this is mainly because the model has too many unseen locations in the data. So our main contribution is we can use spatial data property to our advantage to overcome this sparse sensor problem. First, based on our, well, in geography, Tobler's first law of geography tells us that everything is related to everything else, but nearby things are more related than distant things. So formally, it looks like this. If the distance between two locations are smaller than the threshold, then their air quality would be similar, right? Smaller than the threshold. Cool, nice. Let's use this. So we can enforce space and spatially and temporally neighboring embeddings, environmental embeddings, to be similar. This means environmental characteristics, they change gradually in space and time. For example, when the time progresses, the embeddings should be similar, nearby embeddings in time. So we just minimize their Euclidean distance. When at the same time you look at neighboring embeddings, so this neighboring embeddings should be similar to this one at the same time, right? So again, we use the Euclidean distance to make sure all these embeddings are similar. But there is a but this only benefit also, still only benefit dense and evenly distributed sensor networks. Why? Well, because we talk about nearby sensors, right? If you are a sparse network, you don't have nearby sensors. And in practice, most sensors do not have a neighbor. Like this guy do not have a neighbor, or this guy do not have a neighbor. And this guy, well, if you say this is a neighbor, but this is really far away, so we are not sure if Tobler's first law still works, right? So how do we overcome this? We extend Tobler's first law of geography to enforce neighboring embeddings to have similar air quality. So now it's not neighboring locations, it's neighboring embeddings. So the idea is that nearby locations, they would have similar air quality because locations with a similar environment have a similar air quality. So this is the extended version of the Tobler's first law of geography. If your distance are close, your similarity in your location, environmental characteristics will be similar. You are in a similar environment. Then if your environment are similar, implies you have similar air quality, right? So remember, we create embeddings. These are our embeddings. So can we learn how to quantify how distance similarity here implies the environmental similarity and then implies air quality similarity? So that's autocorrelation. So I'm going to show you how to do this in 2 slides. First, we are going to quantify the spatial autocorrelation pattern that nearby embeddings would have a similar air quality by using a spatial statistic method. So one thing that's important here is this is not pre-processing, not post-processing. This is within the neural network, and I'm going to show you how this is done. So if you are not familiar with kriging, it's very simple. It's a spatial statistic method. Create a semi-variogram like this. So on the x-axis, these are the bins with embedding similarity. So on the y-axis, this is the air quality semi-variance. For example, if 2 embeddings, their similarity is within this range, they will be placed in this bucket. So each bin or bucket has many pairs. And in typical kriging-like methods, this is used, they use geographic distance, but here we use the embedding distance because the embedding describes the environment. So some examples here. So let's say in the embedding space, we have 6 locations, 6 embeddings, and these 2 pairs are within this range, right? They are pretty close. So we can calculate this semi-variance value by doing this. Taking the air quality of the first location, air quality of the second location, air quality of the third and fourth location, and use this formula to calculate the semi-variance. And formally, for every bin, we want to do this. So for every bin, you have pairs of embeddings. We were able to calculate the semi-variance this way. This is the number of pairs in each bin. And this is the air quality derived from the embeddings. So because this is air quality, so far, we are only looking at the observed locations, the locations that we have sensors. So cool. Now I show you how we calculate all these points on this semi-variogram. So with all these points, what we can do is we can quantify the autocorrelation with a kernel function. So the kernel function tells us 2 things. First, an influence range. This. So the influence range tells us that there is strong autocorrelation before this range, well, before this threshold, and there's little correlation here. Great. And also theoretically, well, sorry. It also tells us theoretically how embedding distance implies air quality similarity. So this purple dashed line, right? So this means when the embedding similarity increase on the x-axis, how would air quality semi-variance would change, right? So the line like this purple line. So nice, now we can quantify a lot of stuff and we can identify this autocorrelation pattern. So how do we use it? Well, to use it, we assume that our hypothesis is the predictions should have a similar autocorrelation pattern as the observations within that influence range. So what we meant is the purple lines here, the purple kernel function here, derived from the observation, should be as close, well, the green line should be as close to as possible to the purple line. The green line is the autocorrelation pattern quantified using the same method I showed you from the last slides from the prediction values. So to make sure they are similar, to encourage they become similar, we represent this pairwise embedding distance in each bin as a Gaussian distribution, looks like this. And we minimize the overall KL divergence of these 2 distributions within each bin. So minimize the distance. This means these two distribution will be close for every bin, and eventually these two lines will be similar. And this helps us to encourage the network to learn from unlabeled locations, because since we can describe each location with an embedding, and if you look at this equation here, nowhere here talk about location, right? So spatial distance or spatial nearby is not important anymore. We only look at similarities in the embedding space of the environmental characteristics. So put everything together. We have all the different losses from different layers, loss from the sparse layer, loss from the autoencoder, loss from the autocorrelation, local autocorrelation from space and time, and this global autocorrelation. This is from the autocorrelation pattern I show you from the last slide. So here's our experiment. In the experiment, we generate a grid surface with each cell covering 500 meters by 500 meters in Los Angeles. So this is the study area. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Los Angeles, but if you are not, here's Lakers, here's Hollywood, Santa Monica, LAX. Other input data, we have air quality data from Purple Air. This is hourly PM 2.5 measurement. We have weather information from Dark Sky, hourly weather information, temperature, visibility, pressure, humidity. Static data set, we have OpenStreetMaps, we have 82 features. We use 82 features like length of primary roads, area size of Greenland, count of hotels, count of apartments, size of a campus, etc. Other features are like hours of the day, days of the week, days of the year, and so on. So in training, we divide the area, the study area, into 4 parts. In each part, we select 60 locations for training, 20 for validation, 20 for testing. So it looks like this. The red one is for training, blue one for validation, green one for testing. So this strategy is to ensure that we have similar spatial distribution of the training data and the validation data. So the result looks like this. Well, we built one prediction model per month, and this is the result. In the result, we compare, in the experiment, we compare multiple baseline methods, and we use RMSE for and R2 from the prediction value to validate our predictions. So for the baseline method, we have our typical random forest. We have deep air. This is a machine deep learning methods, look at spatial and temporal relationship. We have our old 2017 model. We also have spatial statistic methods, ordinary kriging, and inverse distance weight. So the red one is deep latte, and you can see deep latte constantly outperform all other baseline methods, having the lowest RMSE at every month. In ablation studies, we remove feature selection, the feature selection module, and we saw a decrease of RMS, or an increase of RMSE by 1.8 to 5.1%. And if we remove the autocorrelation component, we have a much worse result, 4.1% and 8.3%. This also tells you that having able to handle unseen locations is very important. And with all these spatial statistic methods in the neural network can really help us to achieve that. Well, but you might be asking, these are for the locations that we do have a ground truth, right? The evaluation is done by comparing the prediction to the observations. But how about the locations that we do not have a ground truth? How do we know that we are correct? So a few things that we did. First one is we evaluate the geo features. We evaluate the relationships between the prediction and the geographic features. And here shows you the prediction and also features of motorway and light rail. So from previous studies, we know that in Los Angeles, away from major transportation network can improve the air quality. So by moving away, our prediction actually show better air quality for both motorway and light rail. And also previous studies tell us that close to parks will improve air quality because of open space. So this is the park locations. And you can see moving away from park, you do have worse air quality. We also look at spatial patterns over time. So from midnight to 9 p.m., we work with South Coast Air Quality Management District. They are probably the best air quality modeling lab in the entire country. What they tell us is if you want to validate your result, you look at your spatial and temporal patterns. And one unique pattern in Los Angeles is in the morning, it's pretty bad. Well, this is obvious because all this traffic in the morning, but you do have a drop in the afternoon and really bad in the evening as well. And this is largely unique to Los Angeles because the large temperature differences in a day will create a thick layer in the air in Los Angeles, prevent PM 2.5 to escape. I think in LA, there's a name for this. I don't have the name here. And it was pretty common, I think in the 80s or early 90s. So other spatial visualization tell us interesting result. This is in comparison, this is owner's kriging. And our result, our prediction tells you, shows you worse air qualities in downtown and intersections, Griffith Park, open space, good air quality. 710 is usually pretty bad because of the traffic from the port. So also look at universal krigings. Again, our result, this is another kriging method. So this universal kriging can actually take covariates like temperature to estimate a trend in the spatial process for prediction. So it looks better than the ordinary kriging, but still it's very smooth. In our result, actually, you can see many of these spatial variations. We also evaluate the selected dynamic features. Oh, there's a question.
Yeah, hi, Yao-Yi. I just wanted to ask you, well, it's clear that you have great spatial resolution here, but to what degree does that agree well with data? Is it potentially overfitting the data?
Well, depends on what do you mean by data. So
I mean, to what degree I mean, on one hand, it makes sense that these certain roads are getting a lot of pollution, but it could be that the pollution is spreading much more widely than just around those roads. So I guess the question is, to what degree can you confirm that your higher resolution is getting a more accurate view than a more smooth model like the universal kriging model?
Right. So two things we can confirm. The first one is this, right? So the RMSE for all the locations that we have observations, and you can see the observations is somewhere here, all these dots. So for all these locations, we can confirm that we can produce good result quantitatively. For the locations that we do not have a sensor like this, we can only look at their temporal trend. So one thing that's important in the temporal trend is this, right? So if the temporal trend fits what we expect to see, then we say, all right, we might be good for those locations, but we still don't know for sure. The only way to know for sure is to install many sensors in those areas to be able to measure the spatial variations.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. All right. So we also look at the selected dynamic features to just see if the selected features is really important. Does it conform to previous studies? So here shows you the visibility in our network. Well, our network shows that visibility is very important. And in a previous study, they installed many sensors. They look at visibilities and they say, okay, it's important in Los Angeles. We also look at the selected static features. So for example, industrial lands, arterial roads, open space are important, have significant impact on PM 2.5 in Los Angeles. Also, light rail lines, subways are also important factors in Los Angeles for PM levels. So in summary, I show you a spatial machine learning methods that can predict fine-scale air quality, and we support some to certain level interpretable result. Ongoing work, we are applying our models to other location-dependent time series data like noise, weather information, satellite imagery could be time series data as well. And we want to improve the interpretability of the model, and we want to model the uncertainty in the contextual data because all the static data and dynamic data that we use to describe the environment might not be complete. We also want to improve the handling of the spatial non-stationarity problem. Like, do we want to create one model for Los Angeles, or do we want to split Los Angeles into multiple places and create multiple models? So second project I want to show you is about linked historical maps. This is based on our KDD paper last year by Zekun Li, who is a PhD student in our lab. So why historical maps? Well, existing data sources typically contain contemporary data sets like place names. But we do have thousands of historical maps contain detailed geographic information at various times in the past. But most of these maps are just scanned images. They do not have the much metadata. So with limited metadata, how do we find relevant maps and make them useful if manual metadata curation is not possible? So we want to use the text on the maps. Traditionally, OCR, optical character recognition, they will just generate fall and river. They will not tell you fall river. So they do not generate complete place names, and that's not very useful. So in our work, we have a complete approach that takes historical maps to generate this location phrase generation, like Mindego Creek, La Honda, Skyline Ridge. So they are not just individual words anymore, they are complete phrases. Then we can take them and use them to georeference the map, because from scan images, now we have a geolocation of the map. Then we can do entity matching. We map the map text to an external knowledge base. In this case, we are using linked geodata, so we can generate linked historical maps. And this is a fully automatic pipeline. So I'm going to tell you all these three components very quickly. So first one, we start by using Google Cloud Vision API. Well, because we work with Google AI for this project, we have unlimited credits. We just use them. So this Vision API tell us there's a label Mindego and there's a label here. Our goal is to see if these two labels should be connected and generate a complete phrase. So first we build a textual model. The hypothesis is that labels in the same phrase should share similar textual features. Here we combine all kinds of texture features, word embeddings, angle of the label, location of the label, font size, capitalization, put them together, and we use a contrastive learning methods, triplet loss, to say if you two are in the same phrase, you should be close, your embedding should be close. If you're not, you should be far away. And the result has high recall and low precision. This means we can use it to determine a search neighborhood to find words that needs to be in the same phrase. But we still need to improve this low precision problem. So our second model is a visual model. The assumption is that labels in the same phrase could have similar nearby geographic features. This has low recall, but it has high precision. And this adopted standard semantic segmentation model called UNet. So UNet takes an image, generate image features, and eventually we will be able to look at the image features to determine if two labels should be connected to each other based on their nearby features. So this helps us to refine the results from the textual models, and we are going to have something like this. Mindego Hill should be connected in a phrase. So nice. Now we have all these location phrases detected from the map. We use the Google Geocoding API to convert text to locations. And that's the geocoder here. So for example, Mindego Creek, we can generate a list of candidate locations because we might have more than one Mindego Creek on Earth. From all these candidates, we just do a simple spatial clustering with dbScan, identify the largest cluster, and we say the largest cluster and its center is the map geolocalization results, and others are noises, and we can remove them. So from here, we know that every location phrase is now georeferenced because we remove all the candidates that are not within the map region. So based on the phrase name and their location, we do entity matching. We just do a simple keyword search, location search in an external knowledge base, in this case, linked geodata, and we can identify match entities. So for example, this node is now a node in linked geodata, has elevation attribute, county attributes, or other attributes, and name and type of the feature. So pretty cool. We can now model the map, and we can now map the map and the text phrases on the map into an ontology. So this ontology says we have a map, and it's a map. It overlaps with some feature. This feature has some WKT, well-known text geometry, and it has a label, Black Mountain. It's also the same nodes in linked geodata. So Black Mountain in this case is now linked to an OpenStreetMap nodes with all kinds of extra metadata. In the experiment, we tested on 3 different data sets: USGS maps, Ordnance Survey maps, New York Public Library maps. So these are all scanned maps. So New York Public Library maps are very interesting, 500 maps without annotated text regions, but they do have the locations from a crowdsourced project. So in the experiment, we compare our approach with 2 other approaches. The first one here is the Google AI previous method. They just geocode the map with all text as a paragraph. They detect all text, put them together as a paragraph, use that in a geocoder to detect the map location. And the second method is without generating the location phrases, we just use individual words to find the spatial cluster and find the map location. And the last one is our end-to-end approach. And what's interesting is here, you can see that by comparing to the ground truth, our distance offset is much smaller than on the previous method, but the scale is actually very small. So if the scale is smaller than 1, that means the identified location of the map extent actually cover the true location of the map. And that means we can use this as a starting point for the user to fine-tune the location and to find the exact location of the map in a crowdsourced project. So for the 500 maps, we can see that we do have pretty good results. So again, the yellow ones are our result, and the other 2 are the baseline methods, and very few of them has no result compared to the baseline methods. All right, in summary for this last application, we can now do more than keyword search. For example, we can search for historical maps that contain mountains higher than 1,000 meters by issuing this Sparkle query. We can say find maps, and this map should overlap with some geographic features with elevation larger than 1,000 meters. Cool. All right, so very quickly, other ongoing projects. I know we are out of time almost. So other ongoing project, we are looking at historical maps, doing object detections with limited training data. This is a wetland area from USGS topographic maps. So that's the green areas. And we do have some annotations. We do have the blue space. This is the wetland areas today. So we can use it to annotate the wetland areas on the map, but you can see the content are not consistent, right? So our goal is we don't want students to annotate thousands of training data. So based on this boundary, the blue boundary, and also 1 or 2 wetland symbols, we can detect all wetland locations and find the wetland areas in the historical map. So the way we do it, we also test it on satellite imagery to identify cars in a parking lot. So the hypothesis is we know there are many target objects within that boundary because of spatial autocorrelation and co-occurrence of objects like cars and parking lots, right? If you see a parking lot, there will be many cars in the parking lot. But we do have only one sample of the car. So we built a generative model to learn a more relaxed representation of the car. And we can iteratively improve the representation when we find more objects in that within a parking lot to improve this representation. So another project that we are looking at working with Cyrus Shahabi at IMSC is to take trajectory data and to detect moving behavior. So the problem is it's really difficult to do manual labeling. So we can only rely on unsupervised method. And the data can have various spatial temporal scales, but still the same moving behavior. And the geographical context might be incomplete. For example, all the POIs surrounding a stay point in the trajectory might not be complete. In Los Angeles, you might have very good data, but some other cities in Africa, you might not have this data. So how do you do it without all this spatial context? We are in the second phase or second project of this moving behavior detection. And now we are looking at how do we tackle this no data problem. The last ongoing work I want to show you is encoding the world geospatial data. This is very cool. So if you look at these 4 images, maps, satellite imagery, a human can know that they are the same location, right? And here and here. So if a human would be able to know they are the same location, can we extract some content embedding from this image group and use the embedding to describe that area and do all kinds of interesting stuff? And because we do have lots of training data, all this pairwise training data, you can just use Google Map tiles, OpenStreetMap tiles, satellite imagery tiles. So there's no training data problem. The problem is how do you design a network that will be able to do this, right? So we are finalizing this work and writing the paper. So overall, summary, we can exploit spatial and temporal relationships across data sources to create large amount of information-rich contextual data. Use the contextual data to enable many types of analytics about spatial things, predicting air quality, detect objects from images, geolocating, scan images when you do not have any metadata for the maps, and also many other real-world applications that require collaboration between CS and spatial sciences. In fact, I'm working with Muhai at ISI on a proposal for handling natural language data. So, all right, acknowledgement. I want to thank everybody in the lab that makes all this work possible and our collaborators from other schools and also within ISI. Thank to our sponsors as well. And thank you everybody for coming to the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Yao-Yi, for a great talk. Any questions? I do have one. Concerning your inverse layer problem, this is actually fairly predictable in terms of when you're going to have an inversion layer and when you're not going to have one in LA. So do you look at like seasonal context as well, or precipitation, which might actually inform some of that for prediction?
Right. in the input, for the input in the neural network, we do have all this information, but we do not explicitly tell it that, hey, you need to look at this feature. So if you look at here, the input, if it change over time, the feature change over time, it will be here. And if it doesn't change over time, it will be here, right? So precipitation will be the one of the dynamic feature. So this is also very interesting what you said, because people has been studying this for many years, right? And the approach I show you, this is very data driven. So the next question is, how do we incorporate something like you said into the neural network and make it better, right? Either to improve the network or to validate the result. Not sure if I answer your question though.
Actually, yeah, you kind of did at the end. It would be like taking some physics into account and actually say, we know that you're going to start getting an inversion layer because your land is cooling faster than the overlying atmosphere. So I guess that answers the questions.
Yeah, I think that's very important also for solving this type of application that require interdisciplinary collaboration. How do you take all this knowledge, put them in a machine learning framework, and use those knowledge to improve the result? So it's not just data driven anymore, also knowledge driven.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question, Yao-Yi, this is Yolanda. That was a great talk. And I think the way that you describe the approaches and you break down the problems is really nicely laid out. I'm curious about what techniques you have found don't work so well in a spatial context. What do you learn about all of these AI methods when you lay them over a spatial context? What things are working in other contexts and you find that this is a especially challenging area?
That's a very good question. So there are so many different types of spatial data, and there are so many different types of machine learning techniques. Let's just say deep learning techniques with so many different types of networks. So people usually would take network and try on spatial data. We do this too. And then we say, all right, we have some knowledge of the spatial data, so let's just use some ad hoc process to post-process the result, right? Like recognizing buildings, recognizing roads from satellite imagery with traditional, typical computer vision models, great. Then we say buildings should have nearby roads. So we take the result, we generate some rules. We say, all right, if you don't see a road, we just say uncertainty is high because now we are not sure. So this type of approach, I call this post-processing spatial approach, would work, but they don't work very well because very often you have thousands of different types of rules, and it's very difficult to carry all these rules from one location to a different location, right? So for Los Angeles, you might have one set of rules. For a different place, you might have a different set of rules. So I think that the real cool part is, how do you take all these rules and make sure your network will be able to learn also these rules and work with all these rules so that it can generate a better result. This is also true for our air quality prediction too, so not just satellite imagery. We used to start by just using convolutional neural network plus a recurrent neural network to capture spatial and time, but the result were okay, but we were thinking, okay, all this spatial knowledge, right? All these people working on spatial data, this knowledge has to mean something. How do we incorporate that in the network? And we did, and the result actually looks better than just use a pure data-driven method. Other things about space is something like convolutional neural network. Usually they don't assume, they just look at a grid space, but spatial data is actually not grid, right? You have directions and you have various types of buffers and spatial patterns. So how to use that is also a very challenging problem. I know it's a long answer, but I hope I answered the question.
Yes, it's great. Thank you.
let's thank Yao-Yi for a great talk. And there is one more in the Q&A.
Question is about the air quality station. How does the number and distribution of the stations condition the method presented? That's a very, very good question. We didn't test that. One thing that we can do is to remove some of the stations and to see if we will be able to still generate similar result for the locations that we do have a sensor to validate, and also for the temporal patterns. But that would be a good next step to look at. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. And we'll see all of you next week for our next seminar. And let's thank Yao-Yi for the talk again. Bye.
Bye.